For centuries, California's Diablo mountain range has captivated us with her rugged, majestic wilderness. Countless sojourners and settlers have come and gone. The ancients, the explorers, gold rush prospectors, homesteaders, and ranchers of the American West. None could tame her, though many tried. At the heart of the Diablo Range is Henrico State Park, nearly 90,000 acres in all. This great park would not exist but for the gift, generosity, and grace of one woman. Her name is Sada Coe. This is her story. In 1953, Sada Coe did something extraordinary. She donated more than 12,000 acres of unspoiled wilderness to protect it from development and create a park for the people. Sada Coe was a pioneer's daughter with the toughness of a cattle rancher and the tender heart of a poet. Her story might have faded into obscurity if not for a group of like-minded individuals. Among them is Pearl Coe Verbica Salters, Sada Coe's great niece.
When I was a girl, we would visit my great aunt Sada. We would go after church a lot of times and bring lunch. My mom, Winifred, and my dad, Bob, and my brother, Peter. A lot of times she'd have on her buckskin coat that she made from a deer hide, and she'd have an unfiltered cigarette with a little plastic end to it. She had a quiet dignity about her, an innate dignity and a quiet repose to her. Her dog would come and greet us walking up the little trails to her home, and she'd typically drinking some type of strong coffee that she'd make. I think she boiled the grounds, and it seemed like there was always coffee grounds in the bottom of her cup. I remember this jar of ribbon candy that was hard and sticky, and she'd offer me her candy. We'd visit with her, and as my mom had said, she would inevitably bless us more than we would go to bless her.
Sada's story began with her grandfather, Henry Willard Coe Sr. He left New Hampshire in 1847 to homestead in Oregon, but the gold rush soon brought him to California. In the late 1850s, Henry and his wife, Hannah Smith, settled in Willow Glen, where he raised hops and silkworms, planted some of the first fruit orchards in Santa Clara Valley, and patented a process for sulfuring fruit. By 1860, the Coe family was raising cattle on the San Felipe Ranch. Their sons, Henry Coe Jr., or Harry, and Charles, were raised in the ranching lifestyle and sent to the best schools. In 1892, Harry and Charles bought a large undeveloped property in the Diablo Mountains located south of Mount Hamilton and east of Morgan Hill and Gilroy. It was known as Pine Ridge. They would create a year-round cattle ranching operation where the cattle could winter in San Felipe, summer at Pine Ridge, and bring a good price at market. In 1905, Harry married Rhoda Sutcliffe, former nurse in the Spanish-American War. Over the next 4 years, they had a son, Henry S. Coe, or Hank, and a daughter, Sada Coe. In 1907, Henry bought Charles' share of Pine Ridge and gradually expanded his holdings to nearly 13,000 acres. Little did he know that in a few short years, World War I would break out and demand for beef would rise as America endeavored to feed the troops. Sada's family had both a strong ranching heritage and a desire to expose their children to all the opportunities that a good education could provide.
Sada was born in 1910 in San Jose. She spent a lot of time outdoors as a small child. She lived in 2 homes. They lived in 11th Street and the ranch out in Rancho San Felipe. This is Sada writing about her entrance into the world. She says,
"The year 1910 does not seem to be such a very long time ago. But in the dark, cold month of December, I suddenly came howling into the world. It was a peaceful world then, except for my tiny voice, and everyone was happy. The clock at that time was not an important master. Only the hours of daylight and darkness guided the activities of one's daily routine. The world I grew to know was mountains and ranges, wilderness and long-horned cattle. My cradle was my father's strong arms and a blanket across the front of his saddle. Thus I lived until I was 4 years old, and by then, I was able to ride a horse of my own."
There were no radios then, and television was unheard of. The years passed swiftly, and then World War I broke out. The world suddenly became a turmoil. During those years, the government needed surplus crops and livestock to feed the troops, and the ranchers' work was heavier than ever. When the war ended, so did government demand for surplus goods. Many ranchers went broke. With no market for their livestock, most of it was consumed by the families at home or left to run wild in the hills. Cattle were given away at $15 a head. The machine age was born, and people in the cities saw a new way of life opening up for them. But in the hills, life was slower to change, and everything went on for 20 years in much the same way.
Sada was sent away for high school to a boarding school in Palo Alto called Castellea. Castellea, I think, really impacted her in a positive way. She didn't complain and would write letters home and so forth. At Castellea, she took some French classes. She participated in some plays. She also developed some of her enjoyment for writing. And occasionally, her brother would be able to visit her at school and bring her something. I remember one time she asked for him to pick up some ink for her so she could write. She did a little bit of dabbling with poetry and writing at Castellea. During the summers, she was able to go back to the ranch, and she couldn't get there quick enough. Going home was exciting to get to be out with her dad, with the horses and the cattle again. Sada wrote to her brother in 1926, so she was actually not quite 16 when she's at boarding school, and thinking of the home fires and the being at the ranch.
"I do hope Daddy and Mom are doing fine at the ranch and that the grain has started fine. Just think, old fellow, 2 more months before vacation."
This letter was another letter that Sada wrote to her brother.
"Mom and Dad are doing a lot of riding at home, and the new colt Dad got for me is a perfect beauty. I rode him before Dad got him, and his gait is very easy. We get out the 8th of June, just 4 more weeks."
So Sada and her brother and her parents lived through a lot of change, and one of them was the automobile. Sada's father wouldn't drive. He got the biggest kick one day when his wife got her car stuck on a hill, and Co had to get his team of horses to pull the car up the hill.
In the cosmopolitan cities of California, the noisy hum of traffic thunders its way into everyday life. Streets are filled with ceaseless activity. Shoppers and storekeepers hurry about with nervous tension, unconscious of the monotonous humdrum of noise. And yet, within a few hours traveling from these modern cities are the rugged slopes of distant mountains where noise and confusion are left behind in the solitude of lands rich in historical romance.
At 19, Sada returned home determined to master the horsemanship and cattle ranching skills demanded by the remote and rugged terrain of Pine Ridge itself. She proved she could ride as well as any man, carving out her own place in a world not always ready to accept her.
When Sada graduated high school, she moved back to the ranch and back into all things ranching: horses, cattle, roundups, brandings, ropings, doing all the barn work, fixing fences, which is pretty impressive, getting out there with wire and wire cutters and hammer and so forth. And she had a horse that she broke, a green horse. She was a pretty good horsewoman, being able to hold her own and work cattle, just like some of the guys with whom she was riding with. Barry Breckling, who was a park ranger here at Coe Park for 30 years, he wrote this about Sada.
Most of the old cowboys said she could ride a horse almost as well as the men. A few, probably the more honest ones, said she could outdo most of the men. One old-timer told me he could still see her in his mind's eye, galloping full out down a ridge, moving so fast the brim of her hat was flattened against her head by the wind.
Her parents would have most likely liked her to have gone into something a little different than horses and so forth with her education, but her passion and her heart was living the ranching life, and so she continued to pursue that. I know that there was a little bit of tension there, and she would go to events and go to things in town and in San Francisco, maybe an opera or something, but she was always drawn back to being a cowgirl, being a rancher's daughter. So when my Aunt Sada was 21, she was out riding one day with her father, and they were meeting some other ranchers. Well, this particular day, she and Charles Robinson laid eyes upon each other.
In those days, it was customary to ride out 2 or 3 miles beyond our boundary to meet the owners of a herd who would be riding in the lead. You would shake hands and pass the time of day, and then ride in with them to the home corral. This was indeed a memorable day for me. The hills had never seemed so beautiful, but little did I know that fate was riding with me, and this ride was to change the whole destiny of my life. Riding in the lead, sitting on a good-looking horse, was a handsome young man with deep blue eyes and bronze curly hair. His features were finely chiseled, and a pleasant smile curved the corners of his mouth. He was neatly dressed in the attire of a true horseman. One could see he was born to the saddle, and that he and his horse were as one. All of this flashed over me, and somehow the world stood still. No words were spoken as we rode to the corral. From then on, as the days sped by, we were constantly together, saddle to saddle and stirrup to stirrup. 12 months of constant companionship brought us to the final vows of matrimony. 2 years sped by, and 2 little children came our way. But for short intervals of time, our saddles never saw rest, and the trails of these vast hills could hear the pounding of our horses' hooves in the early dawn, in the heat of the midday, and through the bright moonlight night as we rode from ranch to ranch, driving herds over long, dusty roads, or galloping to a branding some 40 miles away. In the winter, we would ride through rain and wind to rescue cattle in a storm. No, there was never any need for words.
Sada married Charles Robinson in 1932, and in order to help her parents, they moved up to Pine Ridge and settled there in a cabin. It was pretty remote at the time. They would bring cattle over from San Felipe Valley over to Pine Ridge. They were up at Pine Ridge about 5 years or so, and during that time, Sada and Charles welcomed Irene and Bonnie into their lives, their 2 daughters. Charles and Sada were essentially managing the ranch, and during that time, Charles and Sada ended up leading one of the last cattle drives in San Jose.
The early morning hours found us on the trail, Clouds of dust rose behind the long line of Texas longhorns as they moved steadily across the valley floor. The sound of hoofbeats and the occasional bawl of cattle filled the air, mixed with the shouts of cowboys urging them forward.
They had to get practically the whole police department to stop traffic, what was Monterey Highway, the old 101, and they would drive their cattle and load it onto railroad cars. And then they'd have a big, sumptuous meal put on by Miller Cattle Outfit.
It was the end of an era. From then on, chutes and trucks replaced horses and their riders, forever changing the cattle ranching traditions of Santa Clara Valley.
Sada and her husband Charles purchased property in Gilroy. They wanted to establish their own ranching and have some land together as a couple.
We purchased 300 acres in the foothills east of Gilroy. It needed a lot of work and a lot of rebuilding, but it was ours. And our future was here in this hidden paradise above the valley. I named it Nob Hill. Although we lived some 30-odd miles away, my mother and dad still asked us to come and help them with the big cattle drives to Pine Ridge. So before we knew it, we were buying more saddle horses, work horses, and again rode the long road from Gilroy to San Felipe to help them each year. My father never wanted me to go unrewarded. So after the cattle drives were over, he would ride his horse up to mine and slip a $20 gold piece in my hand, and then tell me with a smile to go and buy a little something for myself.
Sada's parents, they both passed away in 1943, and Sada was divorced shortly after her parents' passing. So that was a lot of change in her life and a lot of difficulty.
The wind is very still today, and all the world seems hushed and gray. The birds that sang have flown away. This is my father's bed. The roses that he loved to see have dropped their petals silently. The garden paths are bare, you see. This is my father's bed. The hills he rode are just the same. The pine trees whisper still his name. But he will never ride again. This is my father's bed. 'Tis Father's Day.
When Sada's parents died, the Pine Ridge property was passed down to her brother Hank. Surely this was devastating news for Sada, given her passion for the ranch and the years she and Charles had managed it for her father. But Sada's bond with her family and the land remained strong, so strong that it would lead her back to Pine Ridge.
I would imagine that that would have been very difficult for her to think of her love of the land and not having a say in what happened to the land. I would think some of the emotions of carrying that burden inside and wanting to keep a cordial relationship with her brother. They had a good relationship, but I'm sure it was very difficult. In 1947, Sada's brother decided to sell Pine Ridge to Beach Cattle Company. Part of his reasoning was recognizing what was happening in the cattle industry and development in the Santa Clara Valley, and realizing that cattle business and having a lot of cattle at Pine Ridge was not really feasible to work cattle in that distance. So he sold the property to Beach Cattle Company. Sada was a quiet and astute businesswoman. In 1947, Sada purchased the Carollands, a stately mansion of 48,000 square feet. It's in Hillsboro.
The big chateau is very lovely, and the grounds are beautiful. For once, I have a house that has everything in it I'd like to have. The swimming pool, beautiful gardens, and room enough for all my things. It's quite a place.
So this is a letter that Sada wrote to her brother in December of 1948 from Los Altos. She had been living in Los Altos for a time with her daughters. She was responding to her brother, thanking him for packages that he had sent for Christmas. And she said,
I did not find it possible to move to my other place before Christmas. There has just been too much to do. But I guess next year will find me spending my time in the famous little town of Hillsboro.
I found a letter that she'd written that she said she finally had a house that she was looking forward to living in, but she sold it after 2 years. This is a letter that Sada wrote in 1948, and she was living in Los Altos still. She wrote to her brother.
I've been busy plugging along in the usual way and enjoying the lovely warm days. Deer season is in full swing, and on the weekends my place seems to be a gathering place for hungry hunters eager for the sight of wild meat. Some have been successful in getting their deer, and others not.
Her brother's response to her, again, he was being concerned for what she was doing as in her business side of things.
Well, it was good to hear from you. There's quite a bit of blackleg going around. We lost a 2-year-old registered heifer the other day. I advise you to have your cattle vaccinated regardless of the age if you haven't done so already, as it strikes quick and there's nothing you can do for an animal once it has struck. You should pick up a chore man there who can cook for himself, and he'd be a big help to you. Then you could get away once in a while. I always look forward to hearing from you, Sada. Your letters brighten my week. Though excluded from inheritance, Sada's connection to the land remained unbroken, a bond that would lead her back to Pine Ridge. Alone at Pine Ridge, Sada faced the wilderness and her own solitude. The old homesteaders were gone. The hills stood deserted, yet her spirit endured in the face of hardship and loss. This was her trial, and it would change everything.
So in 1949, Sada decides to purchase Pine Ridge back from the Beach Cattle Company. She had wanted to preserve the land in honor of her father, and she ended up coming back to Pine Ridge and living in Pine Ridge by herself for about 5 years. She was running life by herself and wanting to recapture kind of some of her childhood and her growing up years, and seeing maybe that was going to be a little harder for her than she would have liked. She just wanted to honor her dad by coming back.
I'm living at Pine Ridge now and have been here about a week. It's lovely to be back in the old home ground again, but the hills are quite deserted now. None of the old-timers are left now to meet along the trails as we used to. I miss seeing old Mike and his long beard, old cows, and Johnny Alimento, who used to ride and chat with us at times. And of course, Dad and Mom not here makes it worse than ever. However, I love it anyway, and I find so many things to do. If you feel like taking a ride sometime, come over and see me. The road is getting pretty good if you wish to drive up instead. The feed is good here at Pine Ridge. Mr. Beach did lots of work here, but I cannot say I like the roads he built, nor can I get used to them. Everything else, though, seems just the same as it did when I was here before. A Happy New Year to everyone. Old 1950 greeted me this morning with a lot of snow. There must be at least 2 inches of snow out here on the hills, and I was very much surprised, as I did not think a storm was coming soon. But here it is. And the warm fireplace tells me it is a wonderful time to sit down and send out my fondest wishes to all of you for this new year. I hope you all had a lovely Christmas. This is a perfect day to read. The snow on the ground and a howling wind outside. It's good to sit by the fire. It will be some time before this letter will reach you, as the roads are pretty wet and the snow is deep. But even so, I send all my best wishes for a wonderful New Year to each of you. Bonnie and Irene showed me the gifts you sent them, and they were very happy little girls. A very happy New Year to a very wonderful brother and his family. Best of love as ever, Sada.
Thank you for your letter, your thoughtful letter. I'm glad to hear from you, and that you're getting along well up there at Pine Ridge, and that you've bought some cattle on your own to stock up the ranch there. You did not say whether they were steers or heifers. Steers, if they're in fairly good shape, do pretty good. The long yearlings are, in my opinion, the best. That is one reason I sold the ranch up there, because I couldn't raise enough long yearlings to stock it, which should be about 400 head a year. So that's about 400 head could come out every year. That would mean the ranch could carry from 800 to 1,200 head very nicely, but not over 800 head during the winter. I was going to ask you one thing, which I think is very important, and that is that you keep the place well supplied with food for yourself for at least 2 months in advance, so you don't have to worry about getting out to get food if the road is bad. Please stock up well so that if the road is bad, you will have plenty to eat. Will you do that? As on hay, of course, too. You need a little hay and possibly some 43% cotton cake for your few poorer cattle that may need feeding. Have you plenty of help?
I've not bought any cattle this year as the price is much too high for feeder stuff. And besides, there's no feed in the back country. So I think I will let it stay idle and reseed again next summer. I do not know exactly what I will do this year. I found a lot of interesting wood here this summer while I was working. I have a little curio store rented in Morgan Hill, and I'm doing a little business there. Nothing to brag about, but I'm holding my own and really enjoy it. It's a pleasurable pastime. I only have a few cattle, 119 head to be exact, steers and heifers both. I could not be fussy this year because the price was too high, so I bought what was offered to me and at the most reasonably priced. I much prefer to run all steers too, but as I said, they were too high, so I did the best I could and purchased both. I always like to hear from you when you feel in the mood to send off a few lines. Best of love as ever, Sada.
So Sada, as she was at Pine Ridge, she was pensive and thinking about what she could do next. And she had sort of an epiphany of sorts.
The lost trails of Santa Clara lie buried in the grass of yesterday, and the silent mountains stand watching in silent splendor, all the ruthless building and tearing down the very structures of their foundation. The echo of horse's hoof upon the flaky cliffs and the sound of hoofbeats and cattle bawl have long faded into memory, but yet these great hills stand.
Just in her many, many reflective times that she would have, she decided to gift the property in honor of her dad. And she was only 43 years old when she did that. And so in 1953, she gave the 12,000 plus acres to the county of Santa Clara with 3 stipulations. And the first one was that the park would be named after her father, and there would be a monument in honor of him. And the second was that it would be a place for the people to enjoy and to be a repose for them like it was for her, because she had a vision of what was happening in Santa Clara County and beyond. And then any resources garnered from profits and so forth would go back into the preservation of things here at Henry Coe Park. This is the dedication of Sada gifting the park to the county of Santa Clara.
Dear people, this is Pine Ridge. For those of you who love the rugged vastness of the mountains, will find it here. This memorial, which is being dedicated today in the memory of my father, the late Mr. Henry W. Coe, is not only a memorial to him, but is also one to the other pioneers who lived and worked and rode here in an age and history as great as that which is developing in the future. It is a pleasure for me to be here on this dedication, and I want to thank the county officials and many others for their kind and sincere efforts in making this dedication possible, and for this beautiful monument which they have erected here in the memory of my father. I hope this park will bring happiness and pleasure to the people of the state of California for many years to come. And may the blessings of these mountains be with you all forever.
In 1958, the county of Santa Clara could no longer afford to keep the land that had been donated. And so they sold it to the state for $10. And that's when it became a state park.
The park grew, and with it, Sada's vision took root in the hearts of many. She saw beyond her own lifetime, ensuring that the beautiful and rugged wilderness that she loved would be preserved for the benefit of future generations.
It was a blessing because the park has grown to 87,000 acres, and it's the largest state park in Northern California. The land has been preserved with ample amounts of wilderness. Sada recognized that she wanted some of the history preserved of her family by adding on a visitor center that would kind of showcase a little snippet of her family's life. She donated some of her furniture and some paintings. In 1971, Sada contributed and oversaw the whole construction of the visitor center and paid for that, continuing to honor her family's legacy. In the years after the visitor center was built, Sada would come up to Pine Ridge now and then. I'm sure that was a very poignant time for her to come up and see the place in which she grew up, and being in the mountains and hearing the echoes of the cattle's hoofbeats and just the memories that she had as a child coming back to the park. And she did that a few times until her passing of cancer in 1979. Sada chose to be buried at Mount Hope Cemetery in Morgan Hill instead of Oak Glen Cemetery, where the family co-plot is. I think that was another way for her to be close to the beloved Pine Ridge.
Sada and her family had lived through an era of modernization that not only changed the way of life for farmers and ranchers, but our very notion of ownership and use of the land. Sada stood strong in the face of powerful forces bent on commercial land development. She ensured that Pine Ridge would remain a sanctuary long after she was gone.
The old saddle still hangs on the wall, covered with cobwebs and dust. A long Spanish bit dangles nearby. Its silver has long turned to rust. Long were the trails that once it did ride, where the mountains were tall and steep, but the trails are now lost under grass that has grown, and the wild wind sweeps the top of the ridges. The tall trees bend as if listening to the hoofbeats again, and the creak of the saddle as a mighty horse gallops once more down the trails of the past. The old saddle still hangs on the wall. Spanish bit dangles nearby. A rawhide rope, still neatly coiled, hangs full of dust at its side. But there was a time when that rope had eyes, and over the horns of a stray it could fly. But now it just hangs there, coiled neat and trim by the side of the saddle and bit, awaiting the day when the stamp of a hoof will shake away cobwebs and dust, and a rider's hand shall fasten the cinch and wash away the rust from the Spanish bit that dangled nearby, and hand once more the rope its eyes.
I especially love this poem because I think about my childhood riding with my brother Peter on Rancho San Felipe. We'd go on cattle drives. We had brandings. I was taught to rope by one of the cowboys on the ranch. Just this reminds me of that heritage that Sada and my grandfather had in their cattle ranching time. I remember coming up to Pine Ridge when I was a youngster, and we had just a fun picnic on the property and thinking about my Aunt Sada and her life up here and seeing the monument to my great-grandfather and the heritage and the gifting and the munificence of Sada gifting the heart of Coe Park for future generations to enjoy. And the beauty of this place is still very untouched, and it's a blessing to have those memories from growing up and coming up here. My mom had commented how much Sada obviously loved the land, but she wanted other people to understand and to appreciate it. And my mom said that the Pine Ridge Ranch was Sada's cathedral. My heart is for people to appreciate the beauty of being in nature and enjoy what God has given us, and to recognize that there's times to be still, and coming to Coe Park allows you to be still and know that God is God and look at His creation. And just the selflessness of Sada and her generosity and compassion and resilience, and to encourage us all to be grateful for the things that we've been given and how to steward them well. To whom much is given, much is required.
Sada Coe passed away in 1979, but her legacy lives on. Wilderness preserved, trails open, and a vision realized. Today, Pine Ridge is the headquarters of Henry W. Coe State Park. Visitors from every corner of the world come to explore and camp along her rocky ridges, windswept valleys, and pristine waterways. They gaze up at the star-studded skies above her dark mountains and watch glorious sunsets over the distant ocean. Away from the crowded hustle of the cities left behind, there's a stillness marked only by the rustle of ponderosa pines and the call of red-tailed hawks. For Sada, lingering in the stillness brought a sense of peace. After a solitary ride along a remote Pine Ridge trail, she wrote,
I felt a realization that nothing is ever lost. The hills in their way could destroy and take from the flesh, but in return, their gift of spiritual peace was eternal. As I turned and followed the road under a starlit sky, I hummed a song and felt a profound peace in the depth of my soul. A page had been turned in my book of life, and a lesson deeply printed there. A lesson of peace and strength gathered from the silence of the wilderness.